This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Ben Settle, compulsively punchable.
He's the kind of guy who you'd probably just punch on the arm really hard if you ever met him.
Worshipped by feminists.
He pokes fun at feminism and women, just joking around, his whole sandwich making thing.
Mildly inspiring.
Yes, I recommend the Ben Settle Show, and anybody who isn't on it, that's their own loss.
Somewhat authentic.
Ben is a very distinct personality. There's no fluff. I can't stand fluff.
Syrupy sweet.
Tells it like it is, and sometimes may not be the most polite manner, shall we say.
Kind of useful.
So I have spent tens of thousands of dollars on coaching and masterminds, and I've learned more from Ben Settle's podcast than from any of that.
Semi-intelligent.
Ben sounds like a crazy guy at times, but he's one of the smartest individuals in marketing I've ever met.
Mostly forgettable.
He's always in the forefront of my mind.
The BenSettle.com podcast begins now.
This is Ben Settle of bensettle.com and the bensettle.com podcast, talking to what's left of my audience after last week's Email Players Rules episode, Jonathan. Although, I got to tell you something. My rant about equality, all right, and why I think it's bullshit, and it'll never exist, but I may want it to exist, it's never going to exist, that rant, it probably pissed a lot of people off. And there's some social justice warriors who think they're business people, okay, even though I try to shake them out of my tree whenever I can, who are listening to that kind of thing. And here's what's going to happen. They're listening this week, even though they hate me now, and they say they're never going to listen to me again. They're listening because they want to see how much more mad I can make them. And this is a phenomenon that Marvel Comics figured out back in the 80s. The late 80s, they turned the Hulk gray, from raging green to this smart gray Hulk who's not quite as strong, a little shorter, but he's more devious in his thinking, and he can talk and all this. And all the Green Hulk fans were just so angry. Oh, they were livid. They just oh, you got to, they were hulking out on Marvel. They're like, oh, you guys, you'll never read them if you don't turn them back to green, blah, blah, blah. Well, 9 months later, they were looking at the sales figures, because back then it took longer for the sales figures to come out and all that. And they noticed that all the same people who said they were never going to read again were still writing in letters saying how angry they were. Because so it is, okay? And Jonathan, if I don't have that kind of effect on my audience, I'm not doing my job correctly, period. And so today, in this magical 7th episode, let's see if we can't continue the negative emotions pouring out, seething out at me right now, hopefully, by certain people. This episode is in part inspired by my friend Greg Perry, just to give credit where credit's due. He's not shy about anything, offending anybody for any reason, or judging or any of that stuff. He's just one of these rare people who just, you talk to him and he's going to tell you exactly how it is. All right. And so he's an interesting guy. So he's a very, very devout Christian guy. Okay. But the people he picks on the most are other Christians. And so part of and relentlessly, and absolutely relentlessly. And he does a good job. In fact, he wrote the introduction to my 3rd novel, Demon Crossfire, and he talks about some of this stuff and all that. I knew that he's always good for controversy. I was so glad when he said he would do this, because he wrote a great intro. But he's one of these guys, and I agree with him completely, and that's why we're going to talk about this, where he rejects the idea of being nice. Being nice is not a good thing. It's actually a very bad thing. It's a very harmful thing. And bringing this back to God, whether you believe in God or not, is irrelevant. You're still going to get a lot of lessons out of this. This is not, I have to do this, Jonathan, because there's always some moron. Whenever I talk about stuff like this, they think I'm trying to evangelize them. Listen, I don't care what you believe. I really don't care. Here's my thing. I'm going to quote Putty from Seinfeld when he was putting some Christian music on, and Elaine's saying, I'm not into that. And he goes, what? He goes, I don't care. I'm not the one going to hell. See, that's my, I don't care. I'm not trying to convert you. That's not what this show's about. But I'm going to give you some interesting lessons here that you can apply to your business and your emails. If you have eyes to hear and a nose to see with, okay, I'm going to play around with the words there. So this idea of nice, if you go back hardcore Old Testament especially, but this would be New Testament too. Okay, it doesn't matter. So Old Testament, it doesn't matter. God has a lot of attributes that you would think are actually considered negative by today's standards, and especially by the churchianity people who are all holy rollers and all this, and they're all syrupy, sweet, and nice and all that, and they will probably cringe at the stuff I'm going to say here, but it's true. And I'm not making any of this up. Anybody who reads this stuff will say, yeah, okay, yeah, it's true. Okay. There are many so-called negative attributes that God has. I mean, it's very clear. I'm not like reading into anything. It's just there, black and white, that people would think you shouldn't be this way in today's like mush cookie society and all that, even though as little as 50 years ago, it was a completely different thing. I mean, all this like kumbaya crap and all that, it works when you're in like a time of peace and general prosperity and we're not being rattled with a bunch of, natural disasters and all that stuff. Like people had to contend with like most of the time when people are much hardened. People have gotten very soft now. People go to safe places, Jonathan, The fact that people had to like have a day off of college because Trump won is the most pathetic thing I think I've ever heard in my life. And so these are the people, and I'm not trying to be mean to them, Jonathan. I am absolutely not trying to be. I'm trying to be kind in my bluntness and my abrasiveness.
I think you're doing this for their own good, Ben, because our society has become a bunch of pussies.
Absolutely. Very pussified. And so I'm trying to guide them, Jonathan. I'm trying to help them.
Preach it,
but
brother.
I can't help them if they don't let me. They need to let me in right now. They have to open their ears and they have to just say, okay, I'm going to give this ranting lunatic a chance. I'm going to hear this out. Okay, even though my priest and pastor are telling me the opposite, you let Pastor Settle here just in for the next 20 minutes, however long this takes. This is a pretty long list of stuff I have. I don't know how long. This could be a long show. I don't know. Okay, but hopefully I get some emotions out of people because that's really what I'm trying to do here, Jonathan. I'm trying to get some because unless I don't get some emotions out of people and I give them a vision of something different, an option for thinking differently, as the late Patrice O'Neill would say, I haven't done my job. So all that said, all that buildup, that 6 minutes of buildup when I could have just gotten right into this instead of like, nattering on. But so let's go through some of these negative attributes of God, and then we'll talk about why they're actually good things for your business. Okay. So for example, God is very clear that there's certain things he hates. He's hateful. Okay. like there are things he hates, literally, like there's a whole proverb about it. Like 7 things he hates and all this. So he does hate. So, people who go around saying hate is bad are just, they're silly. Okay. Go to your safe place. If this is too hard to hear. Okay. I understand. But Jonathan, I want the bensettle.com show to be the safe place. Okay, I want this to be the safe place. I want this to be your new safe place. Okay, and safe from the wiles of the goody two shoe mush cookies out there who would steer you wrong. So
if you think about it, Ben, you're hardening them, right? You're hardening them, so that does make you safer.
I would think so. I like the way that your hamster spins it because that's the way I'm going to spin it. That's my rationalization. I'm going to spin it that way too. It's all in the way you look at it. It's like the accountant says, well, it's all in the way you write it up. Okay, so there you go. So hateful. Now, business people, well, I don't want to be hateful. Really? So the sociopaths out there that are fleecing your customers, you don't hate them? You don't hate what they're doing? Now, this is rhetorical. I'm not asking you this, Jonathan. I'm asking the audience this rhetorically because, I know you know. I know there's things you hate because we've discussed things like this before, okay? And it's no big deal. So yes, there are things that you should hate as a business owner. As an entrepreneur, there are absolutely things you should hate. You should hate it, for example, when Facebook doesn't let you advertise on their platform, even though you didn't break their rules, okay? That brings out the wrath, okay? Something like that happens. And that's the next thing, wrathful. God is described as wrathful. It is wrath, okay? This doesn't sound like a mush cookie God to me, Jonathan. Like no. This isn't the one that you're hearing hymns sung about. I'm talking about wrath.
This is Old Testament stuff.
This is hardcore Old Testament stuff. And I'll tell you what. Now, there's ways that, no, I'm not saying you should go out there and wreak havoc on anybody or anything like that. But what I'm saying is controlled wrath can actually make you sales in emails. One of my favorite kind of emails to write is what I call the rant email. And I'll give you an example. So in the dating niche that I've sold in, and I haven't really done much with that in a while because me and Eric McMillan, who partners with me on that, we're kind of into the golf niche and all that, and we're just putting all this other stuff on the side. But when I was writing all these emails for it, I'd get some interesting replies. One guy replied back with like this 2-page email about how he went to prison for 20 years because some low-class jackass person he was dating like accused him of rape and all this, and then the judge ended up being crooked, and the judge ended up getting like thrown in prison himself later.
Wow.
His lawyer ended up being disbarred because he was crooked. So he was like smart. Like it was like the worst thing. It's like a nightmare for this guy. And he wrote me this 2-page email just ranting. And I mean, it was full of wrath, Jonathan. Let's talk about wrath. Okay, this is a wrathful email. And so I asked him, I said, can I tell this? Can I use this in an email and let people know this goes on? And he said, absolutely. So I reprinted that in an email and it made sales. And that's how you can make sales from wrath. It's not necessarily wrath. It's just righteous indignation. Okay. There are some things that you have absolutely every right to be angry about. In business, this is as true as anywhere else. Another attribute of God that the sob sisters and who sit in the first
SJWs
pew, and the SJWs who infiltrate the church do not like about God is violent. He is a violent God. I mean, there's a whole lot of war and a whole lot of killing going on. And I mean, there's just a lot of that kind of stuff going on. It is what it is. Okay. He's a violent God when he needs to be to get stuff done. And that's just the way it is. And I'm telling you, man, there's some stuff, like there's some things that, and you read this Old Testament stuff where he was going to wipe all the Israelites out and start over with Moses. He goes, that's it. I'm wiping all of them out. I'm killing them all because they were being disobedient. I'm just going to start with you again, Moses. And Moses kind of talked him out of it and all that. That's a violent God. Now, I'm not saying you should be violent like that. So I have to say context here, Jonathan. If I don't say context, some mentally unhinged listener is they're going to do something. They're going to blame me. They're going to blame poor old El Bembo here for he told me to be violent. No, I'm not saying you should be physically violent. Okay, I'm not. Only in self-defense do I think you should be physically violent or war or whatever. Okay, obviously. In business, I don't think you should be physically violent with anybody. That's just not a good idea. But you can be violent in the context of, let's say somebody trolls you. Okay, and there's lots of trolls out there. I get trolls, Jonathan. You get trolls. We all get trolls. So if you're using my email system especially, you're getting trolls. Or you will get trolls. And when someone trolls you, that's good to ignore them for the most part, but sometimes they will hand you an opportunity, fodder, where you can push back against them and give it to them 10 times harder than they give you and make an email out of it and make a lot of sales. And you set an example. I'll tell you what, bullies only pick on people that make themselves vulnerable. That's just how it is. They pick on the weak. By pushing back against trolls like that publicly, sometimes violently in the context of an email, I'm not talking about threatening anyone's life or anything. You are setting an example and you will scare away other trolls. And so it can be a good thing. Another attribute of God that people don't like, Jonathan, that people would say, oh, you can't do this. This is a bad thing, is jealousy. He's a jealous God. Okay. He says it over and over and over. I'm jealous. Going after all these false gods. It's back then, Jonathan, pagan idolatry was like the worst thing you could do.
Yeah.
Like that's like the worst thing. No God before me, basically. And what people were doing is they were worshiping fallen angels is what they were basically worshiping. Some certain angelic beings called the divine council. And I'm going off on a little thing here, but I find this fascinating. So I'm just going to share it with the audience. It's all in there. It's the divine council. God has a council of certain beings, angelic type beings, that he gave dominion over certain countries to. And some of them went corrupted and crooked and started accepting worship. So that's why you have some of these like Baal and Dagon. And, there's a whole bunch of other ones, Azazel, their names are mentioned in there. And God is, whenever the Israelites would go after these other guys, he'd get jealous. And, jealousy it's just what it is. And jealousy is now you don't want to, like anything, you don't want to take these things too far, okay? Because jealousy can be a very unattractive trait. For example, like if you're a guy and you're always jealous of other guys talking to your girl, your jealousy is just going to make her like them more and like you less. So you got to temper that jealousy. But jealousy is there for a reason. It's built in people. For a reason. And for guys, probably because no guy genetically, you don't really want to be raising a child of, let's say she strays, comes back. The jealousy is there baby. For a reason, I hope. Little bastard. And it just is what it is. Okay. And this is in the animal kingdom. It's just how it is. When I had an apprentice, she would stray often from my ways. And this is one reason I couldn't have an apprentice. I'll never take another one on. It's not their fault. It's my fault. I'm a very my way or the highway type of guy. And so, I would say do this. She would go do the opposite. I would say don't take on rush jobs. She would take on rush jobs, because somebody would like talk her into it. And I got jealous, Jonathan. I would be jealous in the sense that this is my apprentice and other people are trying to take advantage. And so I was able to rein that in a little bit. And in business, you have to do that. That jealousy is what's going to keep you serving your customers better, for one thing. Let's say you have customers who are starting to stray and they're looking at your competition. Well, that's going to force you, if you don't allow that jealousy to affect you, if you just try to deny it's there and you just ignore it, you're going to stay complacent. You let that jealousy drive you to be better at what you do. Provide more value, be a better service, whatever it is you do. Jealousy is a godly attribute. Use it. God was a warmonger. So, I don't know how else to put it. They wiped out a lot of, in the book of Joshua, I think could be made into a movie kind of like 300. If you read it, it's a very action-packed book. And there was a lot of wiping out of hybrid tribes, these hybrid giant tribes, basically. They were monsters. These were not like regular. People get all freaked out. Oh, God was saying to kill women and children. No, they weren't human women and children. If you read the Old Testament, according to that, they were not human. These were hybrids, okay? They were Nephilims, okay? That are descended from Nephilims. They were doing a lot of evil things, and they're all listed in there, a lot of evil things. Like some really sick, evil things. These were not humans. Okay, now I know people are going to say, oh, no, Ben's saying certain people aren't humans. I'm just telling you what it says. You believe whatever you want, okay? My point is he was a warmonger, and you should be a warmonger in your business, okay? In the sense that I think rattling cages and, declaring war, so to speak, on things that are bad for your market and your audience is a good thing. It makes people choose sides. Jonathan, I don't consider anyone really my competition that in the email world. I mean, we all have our own followings. We have our own audiences. I don't consider any of them, to my knowledge, like, oh, that's my enemy. But I do put out a philosophy that is completely unique to me. I like to think, at least. And, people have to choose a side. They're choosing a side in the war. They can learn from so-and-so, or they can learn from me. And it's perfectly okay with me, whatever side they choose. But war has been declared in an ideological sense from a business point of view. My whole point. Enough said on that one. The next one is God was an extremist. God is an extremist. You can say what you want, but I know, again, the mush cookies in the first pew in the church don't want to hear this, but it's true. God was an extremist. And I think you should be, everything he does is extreme. One where there's no gray area with God. It's always black or white. And the Old Testament God is always black and white. It's right or wrong. There's none of this in some cases stuff. It is what it is. In your business, I think you should be extremist when it comes to being transparent and showing your personality. I think you should have extreme transparency. Jonathan, I really believe that the few of us who do this have a much easier time selling and attract the better customers by being extreme in our transparency. To the point where I literally make people check a box on my opt-in page saying, I agree to get daily promotions from Ben Settle. And they will not let them sign up unless they checked and read that box. It's extreme transparency. My personality, like I said, I like to, I don't hold back on my personality. Jonathan, how many people do you think in your podcast factory family? You have quite a few. How many podcasters you got right now?
Oh, maybe 15.
10? 15. Would any of them be talking about the stuff I'm talking about right now?
There's one other guy, Doberman Dan, that'll be all the way balls to the wall.
Yes, me and Doberman Dan are very extremist in this. You're right. And I would say Dan Meredith to an extent. He's just not as abrasive as us.
Yeah, different stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's extremist in his way. And that's what I like about both those guys. I think it's probably why I get along with both of them so well. We just don't candy code anything. And so I believe in business, you shouldn't do that. I think you should always be transparent and just completely blunt. You have to temper this, obviously, to your market. I'm not saying you don't have to go release the Kraken on everybody. You don't have to go hardcore Ben Settle on your list. If you're selling to people who are like or trying to survive cancer or something, you're not going to come out there all abrasive. My whole point is this, though. You want to be extreme in what you're trying to do to help them. That's all I mean by that. Another attribute, Jonathan, would be God is unfair. He's not fair. We talk about the equality thing. It's the exact same thing. Life is not fair. It's just not fair. So, for example, if somebody wants to, let's say I do a lot of these offers. Whenever I'm launching something, I do affiliate stuff. I'll like give out a unique bonus if they buy from me and send me the receipt. And even though I send out 18 emails over 4 days, and there's no excuse for them to ever be late on this if they wanted something, I'll still get emails the next day saying, can you make an exception? And I say no. Well, but Ben, I wasn't there all week and I didn't see your emails. I don't care. Well, that's not fair. I didn't say it was fair. I'm not a fair guy. Okay, I'm not fair. And I don't think you should be fair either. I think when you set a deadline, okay, you should stick to it. Now, there are circumstances where that this might make sense. So I'm not going to say I'm not as completely extreme as on that maybe, but for the most part, if you set a deadline or something like that, you got to stick to it. And if someone says that's unfair, that's not your problem, that's their problem. Another thing, Jonathan, we talked about this. Boy, this one keeps coming up, the equality thing. God was definitely, he's anti-equality. I mean, he treated the Israelites a lot differently than he treated the other tribes of the earth. Okay. I mean, he took them on as his personal people. Okay. That's not equal. He didn't treat the Philistines as equally and all that. It's just not how it works. In your business, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but when it comes to my paid email player subscribers, these are the apple of my eye. Okay, in business, my email players, the ones these are my people. Okay, these are like my Israelites. Okay, I take on as my own. I treat them far differently than I would treat someone who's just on my free email list. I am unequal when it comes. I am not equal. I'm not into equality when it comes to that. Okay, some people deserve in business to be treated better with more perks. They're paying you for it, for one thing. And so there you go. Let's see, what's the next one here, John? I know this is a long list. God is a sexist.
Nice.
That makes everybody happy. It's like, I mean, I don't know how you can read, the old scriptures there and not, I mean, I don't think it's not in a bad way, in my opinion, but it is what it is. It just accepts the differences between the genders, whatever. But I'm like that too. Okay, so when I spoke at AWAI's boot camp in October, I got to talking to this girl came up to me and we were talking. And she's like, oh, I'm on your email list, but you make me feel like you don't even want me in email players because I'm a girl. Well, that's what she said. And she was, it sounds like a boys club to me. And I said, well, you're not wrong. It kind of is. Like I am talking to in email players and in my daily emails, I'm talking to type A males like me. I'm attracting what I am. That's who I like to deal with. Those are my favorite buyers, people like me. Now, she could come along, for the ride if she wants. And I said, that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to exclude anybody. But yeah, I'm purposely going after type A male, type A personality guys like myself. That's who I like to sell to. It's like who I like to deal with. And she understood it. She was cool about it. And she ended up ultimately subscribing to email players. So let the record show that. But that's just another attribute and that you can use in your business. You should be like, if you prefer to deal with one gender over the other, then don't apologize for it. You talk to your core group, your troops, and other people who want to be in on it. They'll come along regardless if they want. Create your business to suit your preferences. God is a name caller, Jonathan.
What?
God likes to call people names. He likes to call people names.
That's so unfair.
And it is very unfair. And this isn't even old. This is New Testament too. I mean, Jesus was calling all kinds of names of the Pharisees and the scribes, calling them like basically the equivalent of calling them bitches. I mean, if you look in modern vernacular, that's what people don't understand. Like this stuff, like if you look at modern vernacular, this stuff, and you translate that vernacular to today's, that was considered strong language back then, the stuff they were doing. And that's how you get attention. That's how you make impact. That's how you get an idea across. But he was a name caller. So, I have no problem mocking with calling names to people who I think are not good for my market. So like I'm like the bad gurus, the ones I call GOO-RO. I'm talking about a very specific type of person. I'm not talking about for real, like really good teachers. I'm not talking about the legitimate people. I'm talking about the wannabes. Or I'll use the word expert, EX-SPURT, right? I'm mocking certain people who consider themselves experts, but who have never really done anything but read a book. And so, in your marketing, if you can identify enemies and give them a name, do it. It's good enough for God. It's good enough for you. That's the way I look at it, Jonathan.
Nice.
Another attribute, a so-called negative attribute, vengeful, vengeance. Okay. Now, Jonathan, let me ask you a question. If somebody tries to steal from you or does steal from you in business, aren't you going to seek vengeance via litigation or something like that? I mean, isn't that just is that a bad thing?
No.
Is vengeance always a bad thing?
I would not do that. I would just cut their hands off.
There you go. Vengeance. That's my whole point. You, my friend, are an extremist and a vengeful extremist. I like it. I like you more now than I ever have before, Jonathan. Here's another attribute of God. He's a monarchist. A lot of people think that democracy is great. I don't think it. I would rather go back to the time of kings. I would rather have one king. It's easier to change the mind of one guy than 535 congressmen or however many there are, and a president and 9 Supreme Court justices and all the people in between. This is why it's a cluster. Okay. I'm all about the monarchy. And in my business, Jonathan, it is a dictatorship. It is not a democracy. I don't let my customers run my business or they're going to run me up into the rocks. So for example, There's this trend going around. It's been going around for many years. And you see a lot of companies, a lot of big companies do this, especially I've noticed, where they ask you how often do you want to be emailed? Do you want to be emailed once you've seen this, right? Like we've talked about this. Yeah. We have talked about this. And you know, and there's certain people who do it. I'm not going to say it never works and you should never do it. You do whatever you want. I don't really care. But I can tell you in my business, I'm not going to ask you how often you want to be mailed. I'm going to mail you however often you need to be mailed. And because if I let you, not you, Jonathan, I'm talking about if I let you run my business, you're going to run it up into the rocks. Because unless you've been running my business for 15 years and you know what I'm doing, my business model is, and you know how I do things, and you know what's worked, and you know what doesn't work for my business, I'm not going to take your advice on how to run my business unless I seek it. And so it is. So yes, I'm very much a monarchist, a dictator. It's not a democracy. The bensettle.com podcast is a dictatorship, Jonathan. Is not a democracy. And what do I need? Really, what do I need? Do you really need someone's feedback on stuff when you know you're doing things and you're going in the direction you want? No. But for some reason, everybody's in this community building like mindset where they think everything has to be like shared
decision by committee. That's
just and that's just not going to happen. Another one attribute of God that people find this hard to believe is very judgmental. Like he's constantly judging everybody and judging people and all that. And people will say, well, yeah, but it says judge lest, what is it? Judge not so you don't be judged. He's talking about hypocrites. In other words, if you're doing something wrong and you see someone else doing the same thing and you try to judge them for it, that makes you a hypocrite. You're going to be judged harshly for that, as you should. But there's so many sections where you're told to judge. Greg Perry, who I mentioned earlier, he could probably write a whole book on this subject. He's so into it. He likes to joke that a day without judging is like a day without sunshine. So he likes to go around judging her. In your business, you should be making judgments every day. Every person you deal with, you should be making some judgments. And I think you should go on your gut feeling because there are some bad people out there who will do bad things to you and steal from you and worse. And, if you don't start learning how to judge people and who you want to deal with and who you don't, that's a bad thing. Now, one of my favorite examples is Terry Dean, the great Terry Dean. Okay. He's got an interesting, he told me this. He's like, you know how I can tell who I'm going to do a joint venture with? He goes, if I wouldn't leave them with the keys to my house for a month, I'm not going to do business with them. I have to be able to trust them enough to leave the keys to my house with them. And if he doesn't trust you like that, he's not going to joint venture with you. He's judging a lot of people when he does that, but he has to. It's his business. He has to protect his customers and his reputation and his integrity and all that. And then finally, Jonathan, to end out this long list of negative godly attributes that we should be putting toward our businesses. God is a potty mouth. I mean, there's a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of profanity in those scriptures. It's just, again, if you take things to modern vernacular, there's in the book of Ezekiel, he makes Ezekiel eat dung, eat poop, basically. Well, the words that are used for dung is basically the equivalent of shit. It is not a proper word. It is a very improper word. It means shit. Ezekiel, you need to eat this shit because this is exactly what Israel's doing to me right now, basically is what he said. And so now, personally, I don't believe in doing a lot of profanity in emails and all that. I don't think it's necessary. It's not my personality. I'm not going to censor anyone. I don't like censoring everyone, but I don't like the spam filters. I don't want them to cut me out and all that. But sometimes you might have to use the judicious use of a profane word to get an idea across, just like God had to do in the Old Testament quite a bit. So those are some attributes, Jonathan, that, they're considered negative and considered bad. And I'm not saying you should take any of these too far. Okay. Even though I said you should be an extremist. I'm not saying you should be extremist with all this stuff. There's context here and all that. Okay. Sometimes you got to, common sense prevails, but nowhere, is God ever described as nice. And I don't think you should be running your business like a nice person, or you're not going to last very long. Nice people really do get killed in business and in life and even in nature. Okay. That's just how it goes. Be kind. Yes. Be respectful. Absolutely. Nice. Absolutely not. So anyway, Jonathan, that's going to wrap up this episode. I knew this would be a longer one. Next week, we're going to talk about litmus tests for the kind of, customers you should be allowing into your business. And this will be, I don't think it'll be quite as lively as this one, but who knows? We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Another bensettle.com podcast is in the can. We'll be back in your earbuds next time. Thanks for tuning in.
You've been listening to the bensettle.com podcast. To get your hands on a free issue of Ben Settle's prestigious $97 per month email players newsletter, simply go to www.bensettle.com.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.